Good evening, I'm Ryan Bonazzo. Welcome to Issues and Answers, the candidates' debate for those vying for the Thunder Bay Superior North seat in the House of Commons. We have representatives from 4 of the parties on your ballot today. They are, in alphabetical order, Chantal Bryson of the NDP, Liberal Party candidate Patty Hajdu, Amanda Mottijong of the Green Party, and Conservative Party candidate Joshua Taylor. Before we get into the debate portion of the program, let's hear a brief opening statement from each of the candidates in attendance today, starting with Chantal Bryson of the NDP.
Thanks, Ryan. Chantal Bryson, the NDP and I are firmly committed to a fair economic and social recovery, with the burden resting on the ultra-wealthy and large corporations, so we can protect our regional industries, small business, worker rights, safety and pensions, increase healthcare and mental health care and affordable housing, and provide real equity and justice for Indigenous kids, families, and communities. As a regional, municipal, and Indigenous lawyer, I know the issues and needs on the ground. I have the skills, experience, and most importantly, the professional integrity to implement effective solutions to our known problems. So vote for integrity and the only party that has you, local businesses, and our communities at the heart of its commitments.
Thank you, Ms. Bryson. Let's hear now from the incumbent, Patty Hajdu of the Liberal Party.
Well, thank you to the thousands of people who we've spoken with over the past 5 weeks. Your thoughts shared freely and openly is what democracy is all about. And here's what we've heard. People want to keep the progress that we've gained. They want to keep building healthy, safe communities where everyone has a fair chance to succeed. They want to continue to invest in the environment and create an economy that works for everyone. And people want a government that takes our health seriously. As we face the pandemic together, we helped provinces deliver health care and communities stay afloat. And we supported people to get through these really tough times. But we also got big things done. Since 2019, our Liberal government has invested over $400 million in projects that matter here in our riding, from highways to water to housing. Let's keep moving forward together.
Thank you, Ms. Hajdu. We'll open the floor now to Amanda Mottijong of the Green Party.
Thank you. I have never been more proud of Canadians than I am right now. Standing up for our rights to live in a free and democratic society, even when it isn't easy or convenient to do so. We can see it with the way we've all stood behind our frontline workers, and we can see it with the way we've not stopped holding our government accountable for not acting faster for those in Afghanistan. We need to make free, reliable COVID testing available to everyone, vaccinated or not, because we all deserve to be able to keep each other safe. And we need to provide safety for those who stand behind our troops in foreign missions. Send me to Ottawa to represent Thunder Bay Superior North. I will do what is necessary to keep us safe while uniting Canadians to work together during this pandemic.
Thank you, Ms. Mottijong. Finally, let's hear from Joshua Taylor of the Conservative Party.
I'm a lifelong resident of Northern Ontario, and I've worked with government organizations with a focus in Indigenous issues. I've worked in recreation, 911, and bail, and I've seen firsthand the issues our locals experience. Thunder Bay has seen a rapid increase in violent crime, poverty, and drug addiction under the Liberal government. Rural communities are not having their voices heard, the federal deficit is getting out of control, and small businesses are struggling. I'm running to address these issues. We'll tackle gangs targeting the most vulnerable and keep drugs off our street. We'll reduce red tape and provide subsidies for small businesses to get our economy back on track. We'll ensure Canadians will be taken care of with an aggressive plan to revamp healthcare and protect the environment. And finally, I will be the voice of Thunder Bay Superior North, not just Thunder Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor, and to all of the candidates for your opening statements. When we return, we'll begin the question and debate portion of the program. Issues and Answers will return right after this. Welcome back to Issues and Answers, the candidates debate for Thunder Bay Superior North. During this portion of the program, I'll ask a direct question to one of the candidates. After allowing them some time to respond, we'll then open up that question to the rest of the panel. The first question goes to Chantal Bryson of the NDP. We're staring down the fourth wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, yet local economies across the region are struggling. How will your party support businesses and spur economic growth while balancing public health?
Right. Thank you, Ryan. Our party is squarely focused on getting through the end of the pandemic. We're still in it, so we're firmly committed to the 10 sick days and for federal employees and to work with provinces in that regard. We will maintain the subsidies for small business for rent and wages that the Liberals are going to cancel on October 23rd. We're also going to continue for planned prevention and preparedness per the SARS 2006 report and work to get people vaccinated as opposed to shaming them into seclusion. Our tax fairness plan will raise $166 billion to support industry and small business and the needs of people in our communities, such as the desperate need for mental health care. We will provide free pharmacare for all. And then we will invest heavily into green infrastructure and energy for good jobs with pensions and benefits, not gig jobs and contract jobs. We will invest in manufacturing of PPE, green infrastructure, retrofits of all buildings, long-term care that's not for profit, again with good jobs, not more of the same bad jobs with bad pay and bad conditions, and jobs in childcare. And further, we're going to expand broadband to all communities by 2024 in the rural and the north, which includes residents as close as Shunia. All of that together.
Thank you, Ms. Bryson. We're going to open the question now to the rest of the floor. Who would like to weigh in on this topic? Pandemic supports balancing public health while spurring the economy. Ms. Hajdu.
Well, thanks very much, Ryan. And in fact, a Liberal government has known since the beginning of the pandemic that you can't have a strong economy unless you have health in communities. And that's why we put into place so many of the measures early on, including the wage subsidy, including the CERB, including ensuring that small businesses and medium-sized businesses had what they need. The NDP plan on their tax fairness plan has been roundly criticized as unrealistic, unlikely to succeed, and potentially damaging to the economy. A re-elected Liberal is going to continue to support Canadian workers. We're going to continue to ensure that our social safety nets like EI are strengthened to include self-employed Canadians, for example.
It's really too bad the last time we sat on a stage together, you actually went off about how we have all of these safety nets in place already and we didn't need things like the CERB or universal basic income. And I actually remember you saying full well that we have things like EI, we have things like disability, we have things like, and you list them all off, but those were never the things that actually took Canadians through this pandemic.
I'd like to let Mr. Taylor in.
I mean, of course, we need to have a measured response to this, and so that includes, because we're still in an economic downturn, subsidizing EI from 55% to 75% of wages. That way, as soon as there is any economic downturn, workers are supported and they can get back to work. That also includes helping businesses build back with wage subsidies. And yeah, I mean, of course, this could have been handled a lot better. I mean, the Liberal government locked down way too late, and I think that is at the core of what our issues are right now.
And I would
I'll
just like
point
to
out
reply.
that, in fact, it's not
Ms. Hajdu,
the
your
federal
rebuttal.
government that has imposed lockdowns. And indeed, Conservative premiers across the country have had worse outcomes in terms of pandemic response, both from an economic perspective and from a health perspective. This government's been there, though, for provinces and territories throughout the pandemic with whatever it took, $24 billion in Safe Restart money, ensuring that we purchased all the vaccines, all the PPE, all the medications, ensuring that the research was there, that we had a strong team of scientists supporting the country. We're going to continue to be there for Canadians for as long as it takes, no matter what it takes.
mean, I
So
guess-
was
Ms.
anything
Bryson.
as long as
Thank
what-
you. I just want to say the only people criticizing the NDP plan are the Liberals because they are the party of the wealthy. They court them, they have cash for access dinner, they like fancy jet rides. We are the party of the people. And our costing was approved by the Parliamentary Budget Officer as completely realistic based on raising revenues from the rich and large corporations.
I want to let Ms. Madajong in.
I think it's important to note that the Liberal government was willing and able to do anything except for actually lock down the borders when many, many people were screaming, please, Patty, lock down the borders. And then we were told, in fact, doing that would have been racist.
Well, I think it's hopefully we can actually stay away from personal attacks. In fact, we've had some of the strongest border measures in the country. We made sure early on that we were screening from countries, and when it became apparent that COVID-19 was spreading in countries that we didn't even know had COVID-19, in fact, we restricted non-discretionary travel to all countries, and we took some of the strongest measures in the world. And we continue to have an approach based on science. We've always listened to the public health officials that have been guiding our response every step of the way.
Mr. Taylor,
That's how you
briefly
get through a health
before we
crisis.
move on.
I mean, there were other countries locking down right at the beginning of February. If you look at what happened in New Zealand, we had the same evidence that they did. We should have locked down, or should have closed our borders rather. When they did, I guess I misspoke earlier when I said lockdown, but we definitely should have closed our borders. We didn't close them until mid-March, and that was 1.5 months later. And so that obviously allowed it to proliferate a lot more within our country.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. We're going to move on now. Our second question goes to Patty Hajdu of the Liberal Party. The notion of vaccine mandates has become a hot-button issue. It's led to some ugliness along the campaign trail, which we've seen. Is mandatory vaccination required to get us through this pandemic? And if so, how do you implement that without creating a deeper divide between the vaccinated and unvaccinated in this country?
I think, Ryan, and thanks for the question. I think what we have to remember is that people deserve to have safety in their workplaces, and this isn't a new concept. In fact, proof of vaccination for participation in certain public spheres has been part of our process in Canada for a very long time. What we are saying is that people deserve to be safe in their workplaces, and of course, mandates for vaccines is part of that. We've said that we'll be there again for provinces and territories as they choose to pursue proof of vaccination with money, with expertise, and we'll be there for Canadians to ensure that wherever they go, they are safe from COVID-19.
Thank you, Ms. Hajdu. I'd like to open this up now to the rest of the floor. Vaccine mandates, are they necessary?
So first of all, I'm double vaccinated. My family's double vaccinated. We believe in science. However, a federal leader calling people selfish and stupid on a daily basis is not helpful. It's against all public health evidence. He's lumping in marginalized populations and resistant people with violent protesters, which is grossly unfair and untrue. The NDP is out there today working with public health to get them into social housing projects and other areas where marginalized people live, to get them vaccinated. That's helpful.
And in fact, that's exactly what we've done. We have had financial supports for so many community organizations, grassroots organizations, just some of the ones that I can think of, multicultural organizations, women's groups, Indigenous groups, to increase safety and comfort around vaccination. But look, at the end of the day, I think people deserve safe workplaces. The NDP candidate is, siding with anti-vaxxers, siding with people that are...
That's nonsense, Patty, suggesting I side with anti-vaxxers.
That are actually making it difficult for our healthcare workers to do their jobs.
And you're launching personal attacks because that's what the Liberal Party does, and that's what your leader does, and you should be ashamed of yourself for that.
All right, I want to let Joshua Taylor in. Your leader has said he prefers testing rather to vaccine mandates.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're going to catch more flies with honey than you will with vinegar. Yes. And to encourage people to get vaccinated, we still want 90% of Canada vaccinated, but you're not going to convince people that something's good by forcing them to do it. That doesn't make any sense. And for example, I'm double vaccinated, and I think that we need to, if we're going to have a standard that people have the freedom to do what they want with their bodies, then of course we need to be able to enforce that universally. I mean, I totally understand vaccine hesitancy. It hasn't been out incredibly long, and a lot of people just don't understand the science. We can't assume that people understand the science as well as our healthcare professionals do. And the vaccines are obviously overwhelmingly safe, but they're not completely without risk, and people always, on a daily basis, are making risk assessments in everything that they do. And so you have to apply that to everything.
Ms. Matajan, you haven't weighed in yet.
I'm actually an environmental scientist with a background in pandemic planning and emergency management. The only reason not to test for something is so that you can't find out the results. That's literally the only reason. I have been asking you specifically for more access to testing since this actually started. I'm pretty sure everyone in this room has at some point over this pandemic come across a situation of like a funeral, a birthday party, or something that they couldn't attend safely because there was no testing available. And this was well before the vaccines, and even after the vaccines were rolled out, we know full well that you can still spread this virus.
I'd like to
And it's
interject,
really
Ryan,
important
because it's
to-
clear that the candidates don't understand jurisdictional responsibilities. We've provided testing to provinces and territories, whether it's
91
millions
devices
and
in
millions
front
of
of your
rapid tests, whether it's
department right
billions
now
of
that are
dollars
trying
to
to
increase
get
testing
approval for
capacity.
use.
And we've been there every step of the way to make
It's
sure that
important
provinces
to-
have what they need. But I'll say again that we, at the federal level, we rest our decisions based on public health and
Then get
science.
those tests
And we
made
support
available
provinces
to
and
everybody.
territories to
Federal
deliver
government
on their
has the power-
responsibilities.
Any government has the power to force someone to vaccinate is false and an inflammatory lie. In terms of employment requirements and essential service requirements, those are determined by government employers, private employers, and the medical exemptions are determined by the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And further exemptions will be battled out by unions and labor arbitrations and human rights tribunals and courts of law. Politicians do not make those decisions. Again, Justin Trudeau is driving a wedge issue that he needs to win this election instead of protecting people.
In fact, what Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party is doing is standing up for Canadians and standing up for healthcare workers. It's appalling that these other candidates are supporting the kind of behavior that we saw
That's
yesterday
appalling.
with anti-vaxxers protesting at hospitals. Let's think about that for a moment.
We're not
the healthcare
supporting
workers
that,
I
Patty.
have
They're
said,
two different
the
groups and you
healthcare
know
workers that
it.
I've spoken
Stop.
to have said, please make sure that we do whatever we can do to actually get people vaccinated, because in fact what they're seeing is ICUs filling up with people who have been victim to misinformation, and we all need to stand
And
together.
you're
Justin
vilifying the
Trudeau is
nurses.
working
Ms.
Monajon.
against that every day.
Ms. Monajon.
You're actually vilifying the nurses that are organizing these protests, the frontline nurses that are actually organizing
So
these.
that's
And now
actually
you're laughing
inaccurate,
at them.
Ryan, and I'd like to call it out because in fact the nurses that are in charge of the frontline nurses, Canadian frontline nurses, are in fact two women that were involved with the uprising at the Capitol Hill
Are they nurses?
event
Are they
just
nurses?
prior to the.
Are they actually nurses?
Listen, here's
they
what
are.
I know. The healthcare workers working in ICUs today, saving lives, not just from COVID-19, but from wounds and injuries and cancer, are pleading with officials to
Not
denounce
all
this
of them,
kind of
Patty.
protesting
Actually,
in
I have
hospitals,
nurses
and that's
that are
exactly
coming
what
to
I'll
me
do
directly
every time.
saying,
I'll
"Please
stand up for
protect
I want to let
health
Mr.
workers.
I want to
I'll
let
stand
Mr.
up for the
Taylor
frontline
in before we
workers
take a quick
that are
break.
working
Mr.
so
Taylor.
hard.
I mean, to assume that we're going to mandate like a vaccine or ensure that everyone has the vaccine when there's still a lot of vaccine hesitancy within certain populations, like Indigenous people, for example. Like, I mean, you're going to say that we're going to mandate it, but like, how do you balance the rights of Indigenous people and their well-being and mistrust of government with forcing them to do something? It just doesn't really make sense to me.
Okay, thank
And
you, candidates.
lumping
We've allowed
anti-vaxxers
this.
and the hesitant together is blatant populism by Mr. Trudeau, and it's completely irresponsible.
We've allowed this this topic to go on a little bit longer. Obviously, it is a very important one along the campaign trail. Thank you, candidates. We're going to take a short break and be back with more questions and debate when Issues and Answers continues. Welcome back to Issues and Answers, the candidates debate for Thunder Bay Superior North. Our next question goes to Green Party candidate Amanda Mata-Jung. Population rates have been largely stagnant across northwestern Ontario. We see municipalities struggle to maintain service levels even while taxes continue to rise. What is your plan to grow the Northwest to help reduce the tax burden on residents?
There's a lot of things that we actually plan on doing, and I believe, would be a really good time to bring some attention back to the issue in Afghanistan. We do have an immigration issue in Canada wherein IRCC really just can't do the things that they need to do to bring the populations to northwestern Ontario. And we intend on helping them get the support that they need to allow them to do their job better. We also intend on focusing more on affordable housing right across the board and the guaranteed livable income. That's absolutely critical. With that, it gives people the ability to do the moves that they need in order to move on with their lives and get into positions that are better for everybody.
All right, let's open that question up to the floor now. Population rates stagnant across northwestern Ontario, plans to grow the Northwest. Ms. Haidu.
Well, Ryan, in fact, we've taken strong steps to grow the Northwest through our rural northern immigration pilot. And we brought that in, as you know, a couple of years ago to ensure that businesses had access to newcomers that want to be part of Northern Ontario, that want to raise their families here and want to help fill some of those labor shortages that we see all across the region. But we also have to make sure that every single person has a full chance to participate. And that's why we ensured that we worked with Indigenous communities on skills training programs to make sure that when we develop our resources here in Northern Ontario, that there's meaningful inclusion and participation of Indigenous people so that they can benefit from the economic boom that resource extraction can provide our region. There's lots to do, Ryan, and one of it is tapping into those people that still aren't fully employed, reaching their full potential, and second is making sure that we are as attractive as possible to people considering a life in Canada.
I'd like to weigh in.
Thank you. Out there on the campaign trail, I've had incredible conversations with the hundreds and thousands of foreign students that come to Thunder Bay, both for LU and the college. There are no jobs for them when they're done. There is no support for the things they are training in, mostly in the tech field. So we need substantial investment in tech industries and especially green infrastructure and energy. They want to stay, but they can't stay here because there's nowhere for them to work. And so they keep leaving and going to the cities. The NDP jobs plan absolutely fills this need. That together with our continued support of small businesses, which is desperately needed, which the Liberals are going to cut off in short order, will further increase the problem of retaining people, young people in our community.
Mr. Taylor, I want to let you in.
Yeah, if we're going to have people come here, we need to entice them, and that means they need to have economic opportunities. So what we need is people who are new to the area to have credential equivocation. If people are coming here from another country, for example, and they have to recertify in absolutely everything they did in their other country, I mean, that just means they don't have access to the jobs that they would have had, that they should have had, really. Of course, we need to also ensure that the natural resource industries around here are producing what they should be. Basically, you know, the mine in Geraldton, for example, or the mine in Marathon, both of those need to be supported. We need to cut a lot of the red tape to ensure that those areas can actually have industry that drives people into those areas, because other than that, why would anyone want to relocate to an area that's predominantly service industry heavy?
Ms. Haidu.
Well, first of all, let me just correct some misinformation. The Liberals have no plans to reduce support to small businesses. In fact, in our budget, we have $750 million allotted for the next 2 years to help hard-hit businesses with wage and rent support. So let's make sure we're not sharing misinformation.
That it's going to end on October 23rd, 2021 for small business.
Secondly,
public information.
Small businesses
Secondly, I'd like to point out that not only are we, as I said, investing in ensuring that we have things that we know will work, like attracting people to the north, but also things like doubling the union training and innovation program. This is to get underrepresented groups into the skilled trades. And as the proud mother of a skilled trades worker, I can tell you these are great paying jobs. And so there's lots of work to do to make sure that we support people to reach their full potential. That's what
I want to give the last word to Ms. Mata-Jung.
You keep going on about training, and one of the problems that I have noticed about the Liberal government is what they do is they focus on the absolute lowest amount of training that any one particular person could say would get them a job. So that usually means nothing more than college or trade school, which in a lot of cases is absolutely fantastic. However, we do actually need to support our university students a whole lot more.
Candidates, we have to move on. Our next question goes to Conservative candidate Joshua Taylor. Mr. Taylor, climate has become a key issue for many voters, yet your party's platform boasts the least aggressive emissions target of any major party. How can voters trust you and the Conservatives to usher in the transition to a green economy?
Yeah, so our plan has been independently reviewed by Navius Research, and it said we would reach our Paris Accord agreement by 2030 with a reduction of 30%. And so what we're going to do is we're going to ensure that also creates jobs. We're not going to be have a detrimental effect on the economy. And so we're going to do this with practical solutions. We're also going to hold the rest of the world accountable. And before that gets strawmanned into only doing something when China does it. No, what we're going to do is we're going to ensure that China, India, and the US are all held accountable. And that means we're going to be ensuring that carbon price targets are met. We're also going to be investing in carbon capture technology. We're going to be investing in hydrogen fuels, and all of this in conjunction with one another should ultimately drive down our greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I'd like to open up this question to the floor now. The plan to usher in a green economy here in Canada.
Well, first of all, the Liberals are great on plans, not so much on delivering. So during their 6 years, and actually last year alone gave $18 billion in oil and fossil fuel subsidies that were unneeded by a profitable industry, and bought a pipeline that's not even needed for current capacity. So they absolutely intend on continuing with the fossil fuel industry. Their greenhouse gas emissions went up 11%. The NDP are committed to real solutions that also benefit our communities. Affordable housing and walkable, livable areas through co-ops and social housing where you can walk to groceries, walk to your job. Significant aggressive decline on greenhouse gas emissions, 50% of the 2005 levels by 2030. The same for methane reduction and reducing carbon emissions from electricity. So we're serious about our plan, and the only people who says we don't have a plan are the Liberals.
I'd like to let in Ms. Hajdu, your rebuttal.
Well, in fact, we're not the only people. Tom Mulcair, Andrew Weaver, the former leader of the Green Party, Mark Jacquard, an expert in climate change policy, have all said that the NDP plan is full of holes, and that those experts have warned that the proposal would kill jobs and cause a large-scale collapse of industries. Jobs like auto manufacturers, iron workers, steel workers, the very same people that the NDP say to have they have their back. But in fact, what we know is that as we transition to cleaner forms of energy, we need to bring people along with us. That's what the Liberal plan does. The Liberal plan is considered the leading plan of all four parties. In fact, the Greens have been remarkably silent about their plan in this campaign. And this is an ambitious, ambitious plan. It builds on the work that we've already done, putting a price on pollution, helping to stimulate clean tech energy production, making sure that innovators have what they need so that we can actually see a transition that means people come along with it. That means that those jobs that people are relying on all across this country, we always talk about Alberta and Saskatchewan, but we're talking about jobs here in Ontario that are at risk from a plan that's not well thought out and that transitions people fairly.
Thank you, Ms. Hajdu. I'd like to allow Ms. Madajong into the conversation. This is right in your party's wheelhouse.
Absolutely. The Green Party doesn't have to speak too loudly about our plan because the Liberals adopted our 2019 platform and it's absolutely fantastic. And overall, one of the things that I see is we have legislators that don't know the difference between a beaker and an Erlenmeyer flask, trying to say they know anything about science when they don't. We have a lot of words on paper that really don't do anything for Canadians, and we need to actually really invest in more things like education so that people that are actually in the field can continue in their progressive for employment and actually make real change.
Mr. Taylor. Yeah, so I mean, obviously what we also need to do is we need to have a gradated approach to all of this. What we need to do is also ensure that we're slowly transitioning in the right way. I mean, For example, as the youngest person here, climate change is something that has been a fact my whole life, and I know that for people to put forward that the Conservatives don't have a plan, I mean, is ridiculous.
And the plans absolutely, Ryan, need to involve consultation with unions. The Liberals drop-bombed in to Algoma Steel with a greening project. They'd had absolutely no communication with the union or the lost jobs that are going to occur. A fundamental part of the NDP plan is green transition legislation and always early consults to ensure people are supported. They don't lose their jobs and their homes while they're transitioning. And also divestment of investment in fossil fuel and oil by the CPP, as well as Crown corporations, which Ms. Haidu voted against.
The other thing that we really do need to do is focus on consultation with First Nations. And I've heard it said before that the injunction that we've seen last week with Ganoogaming was a flaming example of the system working, when I would say, in fact, it's not, because if Ganoogaming actually was consulted, we wouldn't be in the middle of an injunction period.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor, last word to you.
Yeah, so as the party who's most likely to be able to adequately stand up across the world to big polluters, what we need to do is also ensure that even those people we're not trying to hold directly accountable, but we need to help bring the world up altogether by transitioning liquid natural gas in some countries instead of them using subsistence fuels such as wood or dung. And also, we need to have a global approach to this because it is a global issue. Climate change doesn't just happen in Canada.
Thank you very much, candidates. We need to take a short break once again. We will be back with more questions and debate as Issues and Answers continues. Welcome back to Issues and Answers, the candidates debate for Thunder Bay Superior North. We're going to put these questions straight to the panel. We're going to start with First Nations communities, and we're going to sticking with the climate change theme. First Nations communities continue to disproportionately feel the effects of climate change. We saw hundreds of wildfires burning across the Northwest this summer, forcing thousands of evacuations. How will your parties help First Nations deal with that changing climate? Who would like to go first? Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, so when Indigenous people don't even really have access to the basic necessities of life, such as clean drinking water, I mean, how can they be expected to adequately address the effects of climate change on their communities? I mean, there are still 33 communities with boil water advisories, and since the Liberal government got into power in 2015, there's been 58 new long-term water advisories. So what we need to do is, like the Conservative government, for example, will be investing $3 billion into natural climate change solutions. So if that includes adaptation, being that we can create firewalls around communities, so structures won't be damaged. Also, we'll be investing in carbon capture technology, and that as a whole, addressing it as a whole, will help the communities generally.
I'd like to allow Ms. Hajdu to respond.
Well, I mean, listen, absolutely. This has been, I think, for me, one of the most important pieces of work that we've done as a government on reconciliation, on rights and determination. This is the work that actually will ensure that Indigenous people have that stewardship of the land, especially the lands that have been returned or restored to Indigenous people. I think, you know, listen, our opponents are talking a lot about the things that we haven't done, but I want to talk about what we have done. 80% of Truth and Reconciliation calls to action completed or underway. Work with residential school survivors, Indigenous peoples, provinces and territories to incorporate Aboriginal and treaty rights, investing in children and family services, lifting 109 long-term water advisories and preventing 188 short-term ones from becoming long-term. And each long-term water advisory has its own team, by the way, with Indigenous people to make sure that there is a plan to go forward to lift those advisories. But of course, also the things that have happened right here in our riding. For example, in Thunder Bay Superior North, over $21 million for Indigenous communities, including funding for Anishinaabe-Aski Nation student internet connectivity, the Matawa Education and Care Center, $17 million retrofit for Dennis Franklin Cromartie. I could go on. These are things that we know matter right here in Northern Ontario. Indigenous people
I would like to tell you about something that I actually experienced myself, talking about things that have actually happened. My Indigenous daughter was actually gassed with a benzene spray on a First Nation daycare. And that she was actually paying $7 a day for the band rate. So as we're talking about this $10 a day daycare, Indigenous communities can do better. The other thing that they can do better is what they actually did for Aamjiwnaang is they implemented an air quality system right across the city of Sarnia. So that doesn't just affect the First Nations community, that also affects the entire city right there where they are locally. We need to start listening to our First Nations communities, but we also need to support them more when they're going through things like court cases, because those are very cost prohibitive, and it's actually intended to make it so that they don't have a voice. We need to support them in every step of that process all the way through.
All right, Ms. Bryson, I do want to give you a chance to weigh in. However, these are all very important topics, so
I need to answer this topic
However,
in particular,
we are talking about
Ryan.
dealing with climate change for First Nations.
Right. So what we need to end is the paternalistic and charity approach of the Liberal and Conservative governments, where they throw a few sprinkles during elections at First Nations and tell them what they need. For instance, when Ms. Hajdu talks about Dennis Franklin Cromartie, they were asking for the asbestos to be removed from the school that was falling out of the ceiling onto student desks and teacher desks 11 years ago at a price tag of $60,000. This government, in 6 years in power, refused to remove the asbestos from children's classrooms. Then what we need to talk about in First Nation communities is equitable funding, which isn't charity. It's due under law. It's due under the Charter, under treaties, under human rights legislation. The Liberals don't care. They deny it all the time. In fact, just this week, Justin Trudeau refused to commit for equitable funding for fire prevention and protection, the exact thing we need to deal with climate change. So until we have safe housing, fire service, police service, and proper health services on reserve through equitable funding, which they never provide, we're not going to protect anyone.
Ms. Haidu, there were some shots fired there. I'd like to give you a chance to respond.
Well, listen, I think, again, this is about with Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, by Indigenous people. And if anyone understands, not about us, without us, that would be me, someone who has worked with the Indigenous communities in my riding and certainly nationally on many key pieces of not just legislation, but reconciliation based on equity. Look at the skills training that was underfunded by the Harper government for a decade. No increases. In fact, it was our government that brought that to equity with non-Indigenous skills training to make sure that no one is left behind, that people have what they need. They have that first chance, that second chance, that third chance. This is a government that firmly believes that we do things with Indigenous people through the spirit of reconciliation in adherence with the treaties. It's a government that passed the UN Declaration,
I'd like
the rights of Indigenous people. It's a government that concluded the murder of Miss
Mr. Taylor had wanted to weigh in. Mr. Taylor, the floor is yours.
That's what this government is.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the Harper boogeyman that keeps coming up, and of course we're about moving forward. We're not about shooting back at the past, and that's why I completely agree with Chantal that we do need to work with Indigenous communities, and we need to allow them to determine exactly what they want, because self-determination is a core principle of reconciliation.
And equal funding so they can have safety.
Candidates, we do have to move on. Again, I will open this question up to the floor, and it's regarding the price of housing. It's become a national campaign issue here in Northwestern Ontario. While our cost of living remains comparatively low, there is still a housing and homelessness crisis. What needs to be done to address this situation? Who would like to start off?
I'll start on that one, Ryan. The NDP has a plan to fast-track renovations of motels and hotels that aren't being used to capacity to immediately house those in desperate need, such as the encampment at County Fair. I've had calls all day, every day about the disastrous increase of homelessness and mental health and addictions in our community and the communities throughout the riding under the Liberal government. So we have something to immediately address that, followed by 500,000 new social housing and co-op units, accessing public lands to do so in livable, walkable areas, because 1/3 of the people in need of affordable housing are renters. We'll waive the GST for developers on those projects to make them attractive, and also provide up to a $5,000 rent subsidy for those in desperate need. For new homeowners, we'll go up to 1.7 million units. 30-year mortgages will be reinstituted, and any young family getting into their first home needs that lower payment, especially with the student debt they incur under the Liberal government. Finally, we'll put a 20% foreign owner tax on to cool the market.
Thank you, Ms. Bryson. Mr. Taylor, you wanted to weigh in.
So instead of putting a foreign ownership tax, what we need to do is we need to stop foreign investment in our housing market, like, immediately. Supply and demand is a core principle of the housing epidemic that we're facing. So what we need to do to address that is we need to build an additional 1 million homes in 3 years, which is what we were committed to do. And we're going to ensure that public transit is directly going through these areas. We're also going to free up space for rental units by committing 15% of unused federal government buildings and create apartments out of them.
Ms. Monojohn, housing and homelessness.
I disagree with you on the foreign home buyers tax. I think it's absolutely critical, and I don't think that it's fair to exclude anybody from the homeowners market. There's lots of instances where somebody who may not be Canadian may need a home, and we still need to be able to provide that for them, especially when they're here in Canada. One of the things that we really need to look at is funding for green retrogrades for homes, and we actually need them to be accessible. The things that are going on right now for homeowners for retrogrades are inappropriate at best, and it's a lot of window dressing when what we need to be able to do is actually dress our windows at home. And we do need to look at the guaranteed livable income, because people need to be able to afford their homes. People on disability and things like that can't even live in a house without a mortgage, and that's totally unacceptable. We need to be protecting everybody in this community right across the board and not leave home ownership or living in a house not affordable to anybody.
Ms. Haidu.
Well, yet again, we hear parties talk about principles, but not necessarily concrete plans. The NDP's housing platform, according to Nick Falvo, who's a former director of research at the Calgary Homelessness Foundation, is ambitious but short on details. And that's the reality. I mean, our plan, we will build or repair 1.4 million homes over 4 years. That's nearly 7 times the NDP target. Liberals are the only party with a plan to end chronic homelessness. We've done a lot on this file, including right here in Thunder Bay Superior North, things like ensuring that we do have transitional housing through partnership with the Salvation Army, saving Castle Green Co-op, making sure that Castle Green Co-op leases were extended and that there was money for renovations and repairs. And we have the best plan to increase housing affordability. In fact, by introducing a home buyer's bill of rights, you know what I've heard a lot about this summer is bidding wars where people have no idea what the lowest bid is. These kinds of things will change under a Liberal plan. We'll make sure that young people have the ability to save by doubling the first-time home buyer's tax credit. These are things that matter all across this riding.
Ms.
The
Bryson, she
Liberals
says your
have the
plan's short on
worst
details.
record of G7 countries on housing developments in their 6 years, just like they have the worst record on COVID preparedness and prevention and response and the climate change file. We actually have a target of 1.7 million with retrofits. And going through the riding, and I have been to every single community we have is in a housing crisis. The NDP is fundamentally committed to addressing the needs of those who are most vulnerable first, seniors, youth, and the disabled, and then moving on from there. And I find it really interesting that the Liberal government is now touting a policy out of Alberta.
Mr. Taylor, your response.
I mean, I think we also need a for Indigenous, by Indigenous housing strategy. And again, with self-determination as the core principle of reconciliation, we know that right now Indigenous people make up 1 in 15 people, or 1 in 15 Indigenous people are likely to experience homelessness in their life, and that's compared to 1 in 128 non-Indigenous people. And so, for example, Robert Byers, the chair of the CHRA, said that the announcement of an Indigenous, for Indigenous, by Indigenous housing strategy would be completely in the spirit of the Truth and Reconciliation final report and the final report on missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls, as it wouldn't only create safe, affordable homes for Indigenous people in urban, rural, and northern settings, but it would also create a place for the governance, to place the governance in the hands of Indigenous people themselves.
Ms. Haidu, very quickly before we go to
Oh,
Ms.
I just
Mottevin.
wanted to point out that the Calgary Homelessness Foundation, despite being located in Alberta, is well recognized for their research on homelessness. In fact, they were the genesis, if you will, of the Safe Outreach program that I launched at the
hopefully
Thunder
the
Bay
Liberals
Shelter
will
House.
get
And
on
so
Ms. Mottevin,
to
last word
demean
goes to
a
you
program because they're located in a particular province is just really short-sighted,
The
and I
Liberals
apologize
demean
to the
Alberta and provide
association
nothing
on
for
behalf
them
of
Ms.
this
ever.
Mottevin,
candidate.
we have to go to break.
Okay, so we're going to get right back to this homelessness issue, and I am a disabled military veteran, and I do know a thing or two about homelessness because a lot of my friends have experienced it. And one of the things that we really critically need is more mental health services right across the board that are actually accessible.
Thank you very much, candidates. That brings an end to the formal part of our debate. There are 2 other names on the ballot for Thunder Bay Superior North, we should note. Let's hear from them now, starting with People's Party of Canada candidate Rick Daines.
I'm Rick Daines with the People's Party of Canada, Thunder Bay Superior North riding. What led me on this journey is seeing the division created with families, friends, co-workers, and seeing the hardships that were created by government decisions. Also concerns for our future and our future generations based on irresponsible government actions such as out-of-control spending. So what I'm offering, along with the People's Party of Canada, is respect for everyone regardless of who you are, responsibility for our actions and decisions, fairness in our approach, and freedom for all Canadians. So I ask that you vote between now and September the 20th and vote with your heart. Do what you know is right.
And finally, before we take a quick break, here's a look at Alex Vauden, who's representing the Libertarian Party.
Oh, my name's Alex Vauden, and I'm running for the Libertarian Party of Canada. Over my time speaking to the people of Thunder Bay Superior North, I've noticed a lot of what you would call fear voting. To that, I say don't vote against something. It degrades our democracy. Vote for who you believe in, whether it's the Libertarians, the Greens, the PPC, or an independent. Don't think of it as throwing away your vote. Think of it more as an investment towards the future. Think of it as breaking a cycle of growing partisanship. Our vote is a reflection of our values and must represent it. Although this country was founded by two parties, it was built on diversity. We should let our parliament reflect that. For our democracy to thrive, we can never compromise on our values.
And when we return, we'll be back with closing statements from the candidates here in studio. Welcome back to Issues and Answers, the candidates debate for Thunder Bay Superior North. Before we conclude our program, let's hear final word from each of our candidates in attendance. Ms. Bryson, 45 seconds, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ryan. It's time for a shift upward in tax burden to allow for a fair and effective economic and social recovery from the large corporations and the ultra wealthy that only benefit themselves, their shareholders, and the Liberal and Conservative supporters and parties. Another Trudeau government would be a disaster for our riding in the country. Our local MP has shown nothing but blind loyalty to him, despite his incredible lack of ethics, competence, and the Liberal failure to meet our community needs that are in crisis. Shiny videos and roundtables and plans don't solve problems. Equity and responsible and respectful government does. Bring back a strong and independent voice to Thunder Bay Superior North.
Thank you, Ms. Bryson. Ms. Haidu.
Thanks, Ryan. I have the experience and determination to serve Thunder Bay Superior North the best. I've been there, fighting for the things that you've told me matter here in this riding. And together, we've achieved big things. Over the past few years, I've landed $400 million in new investments for things our communities need on climate change, economic development, and infrastructure that keeps all of us going. I've worked with Northern and Indigenous leaders and Ontario to make sure our region could keep people safe and get everyone vaccinated quickly. We've done hard things together, and I'll continue to stand up for the things that matter: community, reconciliation, an inclusive economy, that fair chance for everyone. Thank you, Thunder Bay Superior North.
Thank you very much, Ms. Haidu. Ms. Montajong, what would you like to say to voters?
Canadians need a government to unite them, not divide them. We need politicians that encourage people to do what's right, not politicians demonizing them, especially when their skepticism of this government comes from a good place of healthy fear. Of all the candidates up here right now, I'm the only one willing to say this government is not ready to implement the vaccine passport. If it was ready and if it was capable, this would be a federal initiative, not piecemeal to the provinces. We need more and better testing available to everyone for free, vaccinated or not. Send me to Ottawa and I will fight for the implementation of real science in all decisions going forward, putting an end to the fear-mongering we've seen for the past 6 years.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mata-Jong. We'll wrap things up with Mr. Taylor.
Well, thank you very much for your time this evening, and thank you to my fellow candidates for this mostly civil debate. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have a solution for every one of your problems, but I can promise you that I will work with every one of you to find them. And no matter how this campaign turns out, I'd like to thank the people who've supported me, whether it's Don from Scriber, Carson, Ryan, or Tim in Marathon, Jacob and Ben in Geraldton, or Kenny and Armstrong. Your support means more than you'll ever know. I want to be the MP of a riding where I know people by their names, not by their problems, where people feel comfortable coming up to me and sharing their concerns, their dreams, or just to talk. An MP is elected by their constituents, not by their leader. Vote for me, and I'll take us to Ottawa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor, and thank you to all of the candidates for putting their names forward, and thank you for watching. We hope this debate has been informative. Take care.